My name is Hester Langford, and I am 81 years old. If you'd asked anyone in this town 10 years ago who I was, they would have said, "That's Hester, the retired librarian with the best apple pie recipe in Mason County." They might have mentioned my front porch full of petunias or how I used to read stories at the local library every Tuesday afternoon. I wasn't famous. I wasn't flashy. But I was respected. I was loved. At least I thought I was. Now, if you asked the same folks, they'd probably squint, wrinkle their brows and say, "Is she still alive?" You'd be surprised how quickly people forget you when you stop showing up. But I didn't stop showing up because I wanted to. I stopped because I was starving. Not just for food but for kindness. For warmth. For someone to say, "Hester, are you okay?" I waited months to hear those words. They never came. It started slowly, like a pot of water left to boil. You don't notice the change until it's scalding. I moved in with my son, Walter, and his wife, Dina, 5 years ago after a bad fall shattered my hip. They offered me the guest room, said it would only be for a few weeks while I healed. Weeks became months. Then the door to my room began to stay closed more often than not. The meals started to arrive cold, then smaller, then stopped altogether. At first it was "we forgot," or "we're ordering out, you wouldn't like it." But eventually, no one even bothered to lie. There were days I counted crackers to stretch hunger. Nights when I woke up dizzy and clawed through drawers for the smallest crumb. They had a refrigerator stocked with food. I could hear it every time they laughed around their dining table. Forks scraping plates, glasses clinking, chairs pulling back on hardwood. I'd sit behind my door, my stomach aching, my hands shaking. And they knew. But they let it happen anyway. I became invisible in that house. A burden tucked away in the back hallway like a forgotten broom. They said it was for my own good. They said I got confused, repeated myself, couldn't manage stairs. They talked about me in past tense, as if I'd already gone. But I wasn't gone. I was watching, listening, and planning. See, they thought they'd won. That I was too old to fight. Too weak to escape. But what they didn't know is I had something. One thing they feared more than anything. Secret. One I kept buried for decades. One I never meant to use. But hunger has a way of changing a person. And silence. It can sharpen into a weapon. I disappeared 3 months ago. Left nothing behind but a cold bed and an open window. They didn't even notice for a full day. No missing persons report. No frantic calls. Just silence. Until I walked into that lawyer's office and handed him the letter I wrote 50 years ago. The letter that proves everything they built, their home, their money, their life, is sitting on a lie so big it could tear this whole family apart. And I'm not done yet. 'Cause if they thought starving me would break me, they were wrong. It only woke me up. And now, I'm ready to tell you the truth. All of it. So stay with me. Because by the time I'm done, they'll wish they had left me a plate at the table, and kept their greed in the shadows where it belonged. If you've made it this far, I know you're just as stunned as I was living it. What do you think Hester's secret could be? Who's really behind her suffering? Make sure to like, comment your theories, and subscribe so you don't miss any moment. When I walked out of that house for the last time, I didn't slam a door. I didn't yell. I didn't leave a note. Just vanished. That's the part that must have scared them the most. Because people like Walter and Dina, they count on scenes, on breakdowns, on the mess that makes it easier to call someone unstable. But me, I'd had enough of giving them more excuses. I packed a small leather bag. Just a change of clothes, my medication, and the envelope I'd kept hidden behind the radiator for decades, and stepped into the pre-dawn dark. The chill bit through my sweater, but it didn't stop me. I walked down the long gravel driveway barefoot, because I refused to make even one sound they could hear through their bedroom windows. And when I reached the road, I looked back once. Not out of longing, out of certainty. I knew they'd come crawling eventually. Not because they loved me, but because what I carried could burn down their entire illusion. Let me rewind, though, so you understand how it got to this point. Walter, my only son, was once a sweet boy. Not perfect, but bright, curious, kind-hearted. He used to run around our backyard in little cowboy boots, asking if he could lasso the sky. And he always kissed me goodnight, even through his awkward teenage years. But somewhere between his first promotion and his third mortgage, something in Walter hardened. He married Dina, a sharp-tongued woman with gold in her eyes and ice in her veins, and from that day on I saw my son less and less. After my husband Lawrence passed away, I still had the house, the land, and a sizable savings we'd built over 45 years of teaching and farming. Walter helped me manage the paperwork. I trusted him. God help me, I trusted him. When I fell, just one bad step off the porch while filling the bird feeder, he and Dina insisted I move in. Just until you're steady again, they said. You need family. And like a fool I believed them. I didn't know that months before my fall, Walter had already transferred the deed to my house. Didn't know he'd refinanced it under his name and sold it within 6 weeks. Didn't know he emptied half of my savings into some failing business venture with a partner named Cole someone, or was it Clay, who skipped town soon after. I was already homeless and broke when they carried my bags into that house. But they didn't tell me. They let me think I still had something left. Maybe that's why the starvation hurt more than just my stomach. Because I wasn't grieving the food, I was grieving the trust. That's when I started keeping track. Not just the meals skipped or the lies whispered when they thought I couldn't hear, but everything. I wrote it all down in a leather-bound notebook I hid under the cushion of my wheelchair. Yes, the wheelchair. After my hip healed, they kept telling people I was too frail to walk. Truth was, they liked the image, the poor old woman they were caring for. It made them saints in the eyes of their friends. But I wasn't helpless. I practiced walking every night after they went to bed, one trembling step at a time, until I could cross the room without falling. And with every silent lap, I whispered to myself, not yet, but soon. Now let me tell you about the envelope. The one they didn't know existed. Inside it, a copy of Lawrence's original will. Dated, notarized. And nowhere did it mention Walter's name as a beneficiary. Lawrence had left everything to me. And if I passed, everything to go to our niece Charlotte, not Walter. Because even Lawrence, back then, had sensed something in our boy that gave him pause. But I never had the heart to tell Walter. I thought it would change, that he'd grow out of his entitlement, that he'd choose love over greed. Instead, he chose silence. The legal version of that will was never filed, because I didn't think I'd need it. We were a family. Why stir conflict? But when I saw how far he was willing to go, stealing my home, starving me, parading me like some frail ornament to win social sympathy, I knew it was time to open the vault. I took the envelope, my notebook, and a list of every unauthorized transaction I had quietly copied down, and I walked straight into the office of a woman named Darlene Marks. Fierce, unapologetically protective of senior citizens. I'd seen her speak once at a community center, back when I could still drive. She was the kind of lawyer who didn't ask if you had money. She asked who wronged you. And when I laid out my story, her expression didn't even flinch. She looked at the paperwork, nodded once, and said, "They messed with the wrong grandma." The next few weeks passed in a blur of legal filings, notarized affidavits, and old friends coming forward to offer character witness. Darlene was a force, and with her I felt like a human being again. But the part that mattered most, the clause Lawrence included. If any fraud or coercion was discovered, every asset taken from me would be frozen and returned. And if any property was sold under false pretenses, the buyer would be sued. Walter thought I was old. He forgot I was also wise. And now, the machine he built on my silence was about to collapse under the weight of the truth. But before the papers could be served, something happened. A knock on Darlene's office door. Courier. Small envelope. Inside. Photograph. Of me. Sitting in Walter's kitchen, gaunt and pale in my robe, staring at a cold plate of food. On the back, scribbled in shaky handwriting. "She won't survive this. Leave it alone." There it was again. The threat. Only this time someone else was watching too. Someone had been inside that house. Someone who knew everything and wanted to keep it buried. But what they didn't know, I was done being buried. And I wasn't afraid anymore. If this chapter gripped your heart, get ready. The betrayal is just beginning to unravel, and Hester's quiet strength is only getting louder. Like, comment, and subscribe to follow her incredible journey of justice, survival, and ultimate redemption. When I left Darlene's office that day, my spine felt straighter. I wasn't just some forgotten grandmother anymore. I was a woman with a plan. With proof. With power. And for the first time in years, the cold fog of helplessness had lifted. But that photograph, that threat, lingered in my mind like a shadow that moved even when the light changed. Who had taken it? And more importantly, how? Someone had been inside Walter's house, while I lived there, documenting everything. Every moment I sat in silence. Every time I was handed a dry piece of toast or denied a warm blanket. Someone had been close enough to see me, but not close enough to help. Or maybe they had helped. Maybe that photo was a warning. Not for me, but for the ones who stole my life and built a fortress of lies around it. By the time I returned to the apartment Darlene arranged for me, just a modest 2-bedroom above a retired librarian named Marla, I was already spinning with questions. My bones ached, but my heart beat faster than it had in years. And then I saw it. A second envelope, taped to the inside of my apartment door. No name. No stamp. Just my initials, G. I peeled it open with shaking fingers. Inside was a single sheet of lined notebook paper. I know what they did. I saw it. All of it. If you want the rest of the photos, come to the old train station. Midnight. Don't bring anyone. No signature. No instructions beyond that. For most people that would have been the end. Too risky. Too dangerous. But I wasn't most people anymore. I had nothing left to lose. That night I didn't sleep. I sat at the edge of the bed, clutching Lawrence's old army flashlight and wearing my sturdiest shoes, the ones with the rubber soles and side zippers. I felt like a girl again, waiting for the world to crack open and reveal a secret. At 11:47 p.m., I locked up the apartment, tucked the will and the notebook under my coat, and walked 3 blocks to the edge of town where the train station stood like a ghost from another era. The platform was empty. Not even a cat or a flickering light. Just the hollow sound of wind brushing past cracked windows and rusted rails. I stepped into the station's main room, once grand now forgotten, and whispered, "Hello." No answer. Only the creak of old wood beneath my feet. Then a rustle behind me. I turned fast, heart thudding, flashlight in hand. A figure emerged from the shadows. A man, maybe mid-50s, denim jacket, gray-streaked hair, and eyes that had seen too much. He didn't speak at first. Just extended a manila folder. "I followed them," he said finally, voice gravelly. "Took pictures. Recorded things. 4 months. Why?" I asked, barely able to form the word. He looked at me dead in the eyes. "Because they did the same to my mother. And she didn't survive it." A silence fell between us. Thick, painful, and full of unspoken grief. "My name's Conrad," he said. "I fix boilers. Install security cameras on the side. Did a job at your son's place last year. Something didn't sit right. You saw them hurt me." He nodded. He'd turn the cameras off every time they served dinner. Every time the home health aide came by. But I set up a backup stream. Hidden. Stored everything. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. And the photo. I sent it. As a warning. Didn't know you'd come back swinging. But I'm glad you did. He handed me the folder. Everything's in here. Timestamps. Audio. Video. Even conversations they had when they thought no one was listening. I clutched it like a lifeline. "But why help me now?" His eyes darkened. "Because you're the only one who made it out alive." Suddenly, the full weight of it hit me. Walter and Dina weren't just careless. They were calculated. Practiced. Conrad's mother had been their test run. And I was supposed to be the final act. I took the folder home that night, locked it in a drawer, called Darlene the next morning. Her reaction was sharp, immediate. "We've got them," she said, almost breathless. "With this, we don't just sue, we bury them. Publicly. Permanently." But part of me hesitated. I'd lived for so long in silence. The idea of making noise now felt foreign. Darlene must have sensed it. "You don't have to be loud," she said gently. "You just have to be heard." Over the next few weeks, we prepared everything. Depositions, legal briefs, press kits. Darlene even contacted a local journalist, Rhea Kemp, from the Weldon Gazette, who'd made a name uncovering abuse in elder care facilities. Rhea interviewed me at length. She listened without blinking, without judging. Then she said something I'll never forget. "They think age is invisibility. But you've been watching the whole time, haven't you?" He nodded. "I didn't disappear," I whispered. "I just went quiet." The next Sunday, Walter and Dina hosted a charity brunch. Dozens of guests, social media posts, a hired photographer, all smiling, all fake. But the smiles vanished when the article dropped that afternoon. Headline: Mother turned prisoner. Local son accused of elder abuse and financial fraud in explosive lawsuit. The photo below the title. Me. Standing on my own 2 feet, holding the folder in one hand and my pen in the other. That night my phone rang off the hook. Messages from old friends. From the church group. From neighbors who claimed they always suspected something was off. But not one call from Walter. Not one word from Dina. Until 2 days later, when a sleek black car pulled into the parking lot behind my apartment. And Dina stepped out. No makeup, no smiles, just rage. She marched to my door and pounded 3 times. I opened it slowly. She didn't wait for an invitation. "You think you're clever," she spat. "You just ruined everything." I didn't blink. "You ruined it yourself." I just told the truth. Her eyes narrowed. "You think the world cares about an old woman's story?" I stepped closer, calm and sure. "No. But they care about what comes next." She hesitated. "What comes next?" I smiled, slow and deliberate. "Your reckoning. If you're still here, you're seeing the layers unfold. Trust me, it only gets more intense. Don't forget to like, comment and subscribe. Hester's war isn't over yet, and you don't want to miss what's coming next." You would think that after Dina stormed out of my apartment that night, the worst of it was behind me. But no. That was just the beginning. 2 days after that confrontation, a letter arrived at my door. Not a call. Not a visit. Letter. Cease and desist, it said. Sent by their lawyer. Thick legal language, veiled threats. It was laughable, like they still believed fear was my native tongue. Like they could silence me with paper and ink. But I had ink too. And mine was telling the truth. I handed the letter straight to Darlene. She barely blinked before tossing it into her briefcase. "Empty threats," she said. "They're flailing. You shook their kingdom, and now they're trying to tape the cracks." She leaned back in her office chair, her red glasses catching the sunlight. "But Hester, if you're ready, we can go public. Full statement. Your voice in your words." My heart pounded. Go public. That meant putting my face in the papers, my voice on tape. Meant no more shadows. No more hiding. It meant standing tall at 84, with gray hair and fragile hands, and telling the world that the people I raised, the people I trusted, tried to erase me. I looked at her and said, "Let's do it." She nodded once. "Then we begin with the interview. The big one." That weekend a news crew arrived. 2 camera operators, producer, and Rhea Kemp herself, the journalist who had first shared my story in print. This time it was for television, local first, but Darlene had hinted that Good Morning America might come calling next. They set up in my little living room, moved the floral couch back, draped a soft light behind me, and pinned a mic to my collar. I wore the navy blue cardigan Lawrence bought me for our 30th anniversary. Not for fashion but for memory. For strength. The cameras started rolling. And I began. I told them everything. How it started with missed meals. A fridge locked when no one was home. My name left off Christmas invitations. How Walter and Dina whispered behind closed doors and suddenly my checks stopped coming. I told them about the night they shut off the heat and claimed it was an accident. About the bruises I got from falling down stairs they never salted in winter. About the time they called me senile in front of a doctor I'd known for years, just to make me doubt myself. I wasn't losing my mind, I said into the lens. They were trying to break it. And then I showed them the notebook folder, Conrad's photographs. When the segment aired 3 nights later, it was like a cannon had gone off in town. I was in the grocery store when the cashier paused with my apples and whispered, "Miss Hester, I'm so sorry. I had no idea." The pastor at St. Jerome's called and said the congregation wanted me to speak next Sunday. Even the mayor's office sent a letter, offering resources, connections, anything you need. But Walter, he didn't speak. Not to me. Not publicly. Instead, he posted a message on his business website, some hollow apology about family misunderstandings and mental health awareness. Made me sick. And then something unexpected happened. One night, while I was sipping chamomile tea and reading through the second round of legal forms, I got a message. A voicemail, actually. From Martha, Walter's first wife. The mother of my only grandchild, June. I hadn't spoken to her in almost 20 years. "Hello, Hester," she began, her voice soft but firm. "I saw the broadcast. Believe every word. I left that man for a reason. And I should have said something when I saw how he treated you. I didn't think he'd go that far." She paused, then added, "June wants to see you. She always loved you, you know. Dina well, she got in her head. June. That name cracked something in me. I hadn't said it aloud in years. She was 5 when Walter and Martha split. 10 when Dina entered the picture. And by 12, June barely remembered how to say "Grandma" when she looked at me. Called Martha back. And we arranged a meeting. The next day, June came to my apartment. She was in her 30s now, with her father's eyes and her mother's grace. She stood at the threshold like she wasn't sure if she was allowed in. "I brought flowers," she said. "And some things I should have said a long time ago." She handed me a bouquet of peonies. My favorite, though I hadn't told anyone that in years. We sat in the kitchen. She stared at her tea, too afraid to sip it. "I didn't know," she whispered. "I thought you just didn't want to see me. That's what they told you." She nodded, tears in her lashes. "They said you were bitter. That you were losing your memory. That you wanted to be left alone." I reached across the table and took her hand. "I never wanted that, June. Not for a second." We talked for hours. About her childhood. About the years we missed. About the truth. And somewhere between dusk and midnight, she said something that made my chest ache. "I'm pregnant." Silence. "I was scared to tell anyone," she continued. "Because I didn't want to bring a child into this mess. But seeing you fight, it gave me hope." Cried then. Not because of pain but because of promise. She was the next generation. And I would not let her grow up under the shadow of silence and lies. We made a pact that night. She would testify if needed. She would speak to the courts. She would help bring Walter and Dina's crimes to light. But more than that, she would let me back in. As her grandmother. As her ally. As her protector. That night, I stood at my window and watched the street lights flicker like stars. I felt something I hadn't felt in decades. Purpose. Walter and Dina tried to starve me of food, love, and light. But I had fed myself with memory. I had lit a fire with truth. And I was just getting started. If Hester's courage touched you, don't forget to like this video, leave a comment below, and hit subscribe so you don't miss the rest of her unforgettable journey. My name was finally being spoken again. Not in whispers, not in pity, but with respect. But the thing about telling the truth. It tends to wake the shadows you thought you buried long ago. And as the town turned their eyes on Walter and Dina, something else began to surface. Something I hadn't expected, not even in my wildest fears. Began with a phone call. Not from the press. Not from Darlene. Not even from June. It came from a man with a voice like gravel and a name I hadn't heard in over 40 years. "Miss Hester Montgomery," he said. "My name is Elias Granger. I'm calling on behalf of the City Records Department. We've recently uncovered a deed, one with your signature on it." My heart skipped. "Deed?" I asked, confused. "Yes, ma'am. For a property, vacant land, on the west end of Oakley County. Transferred into your name in 1984. It's never been developed. But the taxes were paid every year. By someone who listed you as beneficiary." I gripped the phone tighter. "What are you saying? I think you might want to come see it." The next morning, Darlene drove me out to Oakley. It was a quiet stretch of land, overgrown and wild, on the edge of a long-forgotten dirt road. But when we arrived, my breath caught. 'Cause I recognized it. Not the trees. Not the rusted mailbox leaning to the left. But the stone. At the very back of the lot stood a crumbling stone wall, identical to the one my late husband Lawrence had once built behind our old home. I stepped out of the car, my cane pressing into the soft ground, and followed the path of flattened grass until I reached the edge of the property. There, hidden behind the tall weeds, was something else. A door. Not standing. Not connected to a house. Just a wooden door lying flat in the earth, half buried beneath dirt and time. "Help me," I whispered. Darlene and Elias moved closer. We cleared it slowly, pulling away vines and stones. And beneath it we found stairs. Old concrete stairs that led down. A root cellar. Well, something more. We entered carefully, flashlights guiding us. And inside I found boxes. Stacks of boxes. Files. Photographs. Ledgers. They weren't mine. They were Walter's. And Lawrence's. And one name that chilled me to the bone. Dina Talbot. I opened one box, my hands trembling. Inside were transaction records. Money moved between accounts I'd never seen. Funds funneled from my late husband's estate into a charitable foundation I never approved. In Dina's handwriting, I saw forged receipts, signed under my name, with dates that matched the very days I was hospitalized years ago. And worse, land deeds. Multiple. All traced back to companies connected to Walter. He hadn't just taken my home. He'd used my identity to build a real estate empire. My voice caught in my throat. I had been the ghost behind his fortune. The silent shareholder. The unknowing investor. And all this time he'd kept it hidden here, underground. I turned to Darlene. "Can we prove this?" She didn't even blink. "With this much evidence," she said. "We don't just prove it. We bring down the whole house of cards." The fallout was swift. Darlene filed the papers the next morning. Fraud, elder abuse, financial manipulation, identity theft. The local news picked up the story. Then the state press. And just like that, Walter Talbot, councilman, businessman, town darling, was on the front page. But Walter didn't go down quietly. He called me. For the first time in years. He didn't apologize. He didn't cry. He threatened. "You don't know what you're playing with, mother," he growled. "There are things in that box that could ruin more than just me." "I know," I replied. And I hung up. Because it wasn't just about me anymore. It was about everyone they'd stepped on. People they'd scammed. The seniors they helped, while draining their savings. The women Dina mentored, only to siphon off their inheritances through financial advising. This wasn't a family feud. It was a criminal operation wearing Sunday smiles. And I was going to burn it down. The town split in two. Some still defended Walter, unable to believe the golden boy could fall so far. Others sent me flowers, letters, whispered thank yous in the street. And June. She stood by me every step of the way. She moved into my guest room, helped organize the evidence, cooked dinner when I was too exhausted to think. One night, as we sorted through more files, she looked at me and said, "You know, you didn't just save yourself. You saved me." I didn't answer. I just squeezed her hand. Because that was enough. I wasn't a ghost anymore. I was fire. And I was still rising. If you're rooting for Hester to finally bring justice to light, hit that like button, leave a comment below with your thoughts, and make sure to subscribe so you don't miss what happens next. The courthouse in Pine Grove had never seen a line this long. They came in trucks, in beat-up station wagons, in polished town cars with tinted windows. Folks who hadn't spoken my name in a decade now wore it like a badge. Hester Montgomery? That woman's a legend. I even caught wind that someone had made a t-shirt with my picture on it. Can you imagine? 82 years old, and suddenly I was a local icon. But for me, this wasn't a show. This was war. And I had the evidence to win it. The trial began on a brisk Monday morning. Walter sat in a tailored navy blue suit at the defendant's table. His hands folded neatly. His expression rehearsed, cool, calm above it all. Dina wasn't beside him. She had fled the state the week prior, lawyers scrambling to keep her out of handcuffs. But her name rang in that courtroom like a funeral bell. I took the stand with June holding my arm. The judge asked if I needed assistance to speak. Said no. Because I wanted the world to hear my voice. Loud, clear, and unstoppable. I am not here because I'm angry. I began, my voice calm. I'm here because I was forgotten. Erased. And when they were done with me, they starved me into silence. But I am still here. And I will not be quiet anymore. The room held its breath. Then, piece by piece, we laid it out. The medical records, the stolen funds, the forged signatures, the shell companies. I watched jurors shake their heads, scribble furiously. The DA's office leaned on Darlene's investigation and on the files from that hidden cellar. Hundreds of pages of records, every line a betrayal in black and white. Walter didn't flinch. But I saw it in his eyes. He was drowning. And he knew it. But this story wasn't just about what Walter did. It was also about why. During cross-examination, a surprise came. One I hadn't expected. A woman named Maria Taylor, thin and trembling, took the stand. She was 62, soft-spoken, and had been a client of Dina's financial counseling group. Mrs. Talbot encouraged me to invest my retirement into a trust, Maria said, voice cracking. She said it would help my grandchildren go to college. And did it? The prosecutor asked. No, she whispered. There was no trust. The money disappeared. I looked at Walter, still unmoved, still polished. But when the judge allowed the gallery to hear phone recordings, his voice talking about cutting off the old lady before she makes noise, and she'll be dead before she ever finds the cellar, his mask cracked. It was faint, twitch of the jaw, pulse in the temple. But I saw it, and I knew I had him. The verdict came faster than we thought. Guilty on all counts. Elder abuse, fraud, conspiracy, forgery. They cuffed Walter right there in the courtroom. People gasped. Some applauded. One man even cried. And as the officers led my son away in shackles, he turned to me and said, "You think this makes you a hero?" I stared right back. "No," I replied. "It just makes me free." But that wasn't the end. Because a week later I received a package. No return address. Just my name written in elegant, familiar cursive. Inside I found a key. Rusted. And tagged with one word. Church. I nearly dropped it. Because I knew that handwriting. It was Lawrence's. My dead husband. The man I thought had taken all his secrets to the grave. June and I drove out to the old Briar Hollow Church, abandoned since 1992. The wooden doors groaned as we entered, dust clouding the air. Pews lay broken. Light filtered through shattered stained glass like fractured rainbows. Behind the altar was a trapdoor, just like the one on the land. I held my breath, heart thumping like I was 20 years younger, and used the key. Below was a narrow staircase. And at the bottom, a metal coffin. First I thought it was a sarcophagus. Burial vault. But inside we found a fireproof box. A sealed vault of letters. Videotapes. Photographs. A full confession from Lawrence Montgomery. Turns out, he had known what Walter and Dina were doing. Not just in the end, but from the beginning. He had tried to stop them. Had warned them. had threatened to cut them off. But before he could act, he had a heart attack in his sleep. Or so I thought. The confession said otherwise. He had been poisoned. Slowly. And the killer. Not Walter. Dina. My knees gave out. June caught me just before I hit the ground. It all made sense now. The urgency in Lawrence's eyes those last weeks, the sudden illness, the hasty burial, the will that didn't match his handwriting. Dina had built her empire not just on my silence, but on his murder. We took the evidence straight to the state attorney's office. A new investigation opened. An arrest warrant was issued. And just as the town began to settle down, Dina Talbot was dragged back into the spotlight. This time, not as a respected advisor, but as a murder suspect. They searched her home. Found more hidden records. More stolen identities. And a bottle of pills labeled for Lawrence. With a dosage that could stop a heart. Walter tried to recant his testimony. Tried to cut a deal. But it was too late. The truth was out. And the only sound louder than the courtroom gavel was the sound of the world finally listening to me. If you're stunned by what Hester uncovered, drop a comment below with your reaction. Make sure you like this video and subscribe to the channel because the story's only getting deeper. After Dina's arrest, the news spread like wildfire. For weeks, every local paper had my face on the front page. The story wasn't just about fraud anymore. It was about murder, betrayal, and the horrifying ease with which a woman like me could be buried alive in her own life. What they did to me wasn't just personal. It was generational, systemic, cruel, and it had nearly erased me. But now they couldn't ignore me even if they tried. I spent the next week testifying again, this time for the grand jury hearing on Lawrence's murder. I recounted every strange moment leading up to his death. The change in his appetite, the lethargy, the hushed phone calls he'd take from the den. The way Dina started bringing him his evening tea unprompted. And then there was the revised will. The one that mysteriously omitted me and handed power of attorney over to Walter and Dina. I'd never believed it. But I hadn't fought it either. Because I thought grief was supposed to feel like drowning. Now I knew it had been murder wrapped in manipulation. One afternoon I received a visitor. A tall man in his late 50s. Gray hair. Deep frown. He introduced himself as Detective Mark Landry. He placed a thick folder on my kitchen table. "I've been following this case since Lawrence passed," he said. "Back then I was told he died of natural causes. The autopsy was rushed. The hospital took Dina's word for everything. I didn't push. I should have." He opened the folder. Inside were documents Dina never knew anyone else had saved. Bank statements showing large withdrawals made before Lawrence's death, real estate documents signed under duress, and a toxicology request that had been filed but never completed. "Someone cancelled it," he said quietly. My fingers trembled as I traced the paper. "Dina," I whispered. He nodded. She knew what the toxicology would show. Sedatives. The blood thinners in doses that could stop a heart if taken together. He slid me another page. A subpoena for a hidden storage unit rented under a fake name. Elaine Carter. Inside it, every tool of her trade. Forged checks. Property deeds in my name. Photos of documents she'd replicated with computer software. And, most chilling of all, a detailed logbook she kept of my medications, tracked like an experiment. It wasn't just greed. It was clinical. Calculated. As if I were just another body to be controlled. I held the logbook for a long time that night. Sat in my armchair, reading each line like it was a sentence in a poem written by the devil himself. Wednesday, lower dosage. Confused but still walking. Friday, increased sedation. Request new dosage from Walter. Sunday, no food. Wait. My breath came in short, shallow bursts. I had wondered why I couldn't remember whole weeks from that time. Why I had bruises I couldn't explain. Why I slept through entire days. She drugged me. To control me. To erase me without a trace. I leaned forward and screamed. Not in fear. But in rage. Years of silence came out in a single guttural sound. And for the first time since Lawrence died, I felt alive again. The town didn't know what to make of it all. People I hadn't seen in years stopped me in the street. They brought pies, flowers, cards. I smiled politely, but I didn't want their pity. Where were they when I vanished? When the lights in my house were always off, when the mail piled up, when I didn't show up at Sunday service for 2 years. They believed I had gotten old and gone quiet. They assumed. Just like my son had. Just like Dina planned. But I wasn't done. Because I had something even more powerful than all the legal documents in the world. I had my story. And I intended to tell it. June, my neighbor, suggested I publish the memoir I'd started in the cellar. It's not just your truth, Hester. It's a blueprint for every woman who's been silenced, she said, placing her hand over mine. We began transcribing the notebooks. Late into the night. Me dictating. Her typing. And one day something clicked. She sent a few chapters to her cousin, a small publisher in Portland. A week later he called me personally. I read 3 pages and cried, he said. You have to finish this. So I did. Every detail. Every scar. Every betrayal. I laid them bare. We titled the book, The Woman in the Cellar, A Life Unwritten. It went viral. First on Facebook. Then Twitter. Then a TikTok user made a video that hit 5 million views in 2 days. Suddenly I was being interviewed on local news stations. And then the phone rang again. It was a national morning show. They wanted me in New York. A segment titled, The Grandmother They Tried to Erase. I stared at the phone in disbelief. My voice, name, my truth, finally heard. Walter and Dina's empires began to crumble. Legal fees piling up, properties seized, their names dragged through every newspaper in the country. I didn't have to ruin them. They did that to themselves. All I did was tell the truth. And the world listened. That night, June and I toasted with sweet tea on the porch. I told you, she said with a wink. Told me what? Yes. That fire in you. They thought they'd extinguished it. But girl, you were just getting started. Smiled. For the first time in decades, I believed it. If Hester's voice is stirring something deep in you, if you've ever felt silenced or overlooked, drop a comment below and let us know. Your story matters. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe for the next chapter, and share this with someone who needs to hear it. The invitation came wrapped in pink foil and printed on thick cardstock, one of those over-the-top professionally designed things that smelled like expensive perfume. Walter and Dina were throwing a fundraiser gala. For charity. For women's rights. I laughed so hard I nearly fell off my porch swing. The irony. They used the very house they stole from me. Lawrence's house, my house, as the venue. They called it the Montgomery Estate. But everyone knew whose name was on the original deed. And now, everyone knew what they'd done to me. Still, they were trying to sweep the story under the rug with candles and catered shrimp. Trying to rewrite history with hors d'oeuvres and designer gowns. It was the kind of spectacle Dina adored, cloaking rot with ribbons and roses. But I wasn't about to let them parade on my ashes. Oh. I had something better than anger now. I had momentum. And a plan. June helped me into my pale blue dress that night. The one with the lace sleeves Lawrence always said made me look like a spring morning. My hair was pulled back, my cheeks dusted with rouge, and around my neck hung the locket my mother gave me the day I turned 18. It held a picture of me and Lawrence on our wedding day. My real beginning. I wasn't just attending the gala. I was reclaiming my place in that house. One footstep at a time. When I arrived, the valet looked stunned. He took one glance at my name and whispered something into his radio. Inside, the ballroom glowed with golden light. Chandeliers. String quartet. Waiters gliding across marble floors like ghosts. I walked in slowly, letting the chatter fall silent behind me. It didn't take long for Dina to see me. She froze mid-toast, champagne glass trembling in her hand. Her face went pale, then pink, then something between panic and fury. I didn't flinch. I made my way through the crowd and took a seat right near the front, next to the mayor's wife. I smiled politely and waited. 10 minutes later, a young woman stepped on stage. To begin tonight's celebration, she said, we're proud to recognize a woman whose courage has inspired millions. A survivor, a warrior, and a voice for the silenced. Please welcome Hester Montgomery. The room erupted. Cameras flashed. Dina looked like she might pass out. I rose, my hands steady. Every word I spoke came from the marrow of my bones. I told them about the cellar, about the starvation, the silence, the lies. I told them about the day I disappeared, not just from my family but from the world. And then I told them the truth about how I came back. Not for revenge, but for justice. For every woman shoved into silence by the people who should have loved them most. And when I finished, I pulled out one last surprise. A legal envelope, signed and notarized. My name, I said, has been restored on the deed of this home. Gasps echoed through the hall. By the time this evening ends, Dina and Walter will be vacating these premises. People stood, applauded, some cried. Dina turned and fled the room, Walter chasing after her like a scolded child. And me, I just stood there, not triumphant, but whole. Later that evening, June and I sat in the garden, the one Dina never tended. We looked up at the stars. I'm tired, I whispered. Good tired, June replied. He nodded. There was still more to face. Lawsuits, interviews, apologies that would never come. But for the first time in years, I slept with the windows open and the door unlocked. 'Cause I was home. And because the house was finally mine again. Name, soul, and story. If this moment made your heart race or your eyes water, go ahead and hit that like button, subscribe, and leave a comment with your thoughts. Have you ever stood up for yourself after being ignored or silenced? Share your story below. The headlines hit the next morning like a thunderclap across town. Elder abuse scandal rocks prominent family. Hester Montgomery breaks her silence. The photo was from the gala. Me standing behind the podium, my hands gripping the envelope, eyes lit with something stronger than fire. Truth. I didn't realize how many people had been listening. Not until the news trucks parked at the edge of the Montgomery property. Not until neighbors who never spoke to me before left bouquets on my porch. And not until former friends of Dina and Walter called me, not to apologize but to confess. Turns out secrets hate sunlight. And once mine cracked open the sky, everyone else's began to spill. It started with an old woman named Clarabelle Tate. She was in her 90s, a retired librarian who still remembered every scandal Briar Ridge tried to bury. She came to visit me in person, her gait slow, but her voice as sharp as ever. I've been waiting for someone like you to speak up, she said. You're not the only one. Dina and Walter tried to disappear. She brought letters, photocopies, and stories of how Walter had conned an elderly couple into signing over property under the guise of trust management. Of how Dina once filed a false power of attorney to take control of her own mother's savings, before putting her in a care home 2 counties away. Clarabelle had tried to raise the alarm years ago, but no one listened. Till now. Till me. The state opened a formal investigation that week. Elder abuse, fraud, real estate manipulation, even suspected financial exploitation. Walter, once the town's rising golden boy, was now ducking reporters and hiring lawyers. Dina stopped showing up to her yoga classes and closed her boutique for renovations. But still, neither of them called me. Not to deny it. Not to apologize. Not to beg for mercy. They knew better. They knew it was too late for that. I should have felt victorious. But instead I felt haunted. Because as much as the world applauded, there were still parts of me that shook when the phone rang. Still moments I jolted awake thinking I was back in that house, tray on the floor, stomach twisting with hunger and humiliation. And then one night the phone did ring. But this time it wasn't fear. It was voice I hadn't heard in over a year. My son's. Mom. The word barely made it past his throat. For a second I didn't answer. My breath caught like it had to climb over 1,000 unsaid things before it reached my lips. Franklin, I whispered. He exhaled like he hadn't let himself breathe since I vanished. I didn't know, he said. I swear to you, I didn't know what they were doing. You didn't ask, I replied. You didn't come looking. He broke then. On the other end of the line, I could hear it. Tears, regret, a man unraveling the lies he had chosen to believe because they were easier than the truth. I was weak, he said. I didn't want to think my wife, my brother, were capable of that. But I see it now. I see everything now. It wasn't an apology. Not yet. But it was something. Crack in the ice. I didn't forgive him. But I didn't hang up either. That night, I opened one of the last boxes from the attic. One Lawrence had hidden behind his tool chest. Inside were old photographs, birth certificates, and something I hadn't seen in decades, a deed. Not to our current house, but to a piece of land we bought before Walter was even born. A forested lot near Willow Creek. And stapled to the deed, in Lawrence's handwriting, was a note. For Hester. For when you're ready to begin again. I took that as a sign. Maybe I had won this battle. But the war wasn't just about clearing my name. It was about building something new. Something untouchable. A place where no woman, no grandmother would ever be silenced again. If this chapter made your heart ache and your soul stand taller, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever had someone come back into your life after betrayal? How did you handle it? Let us know. 3 months have passed since the night I stood in front of a crowd and ripped my silence apart with every word they never expected to hear from me. Since then, the winds have shifted. The house that once swallowed me whole now echoes with a new rhythm, my own. But let me tell you what they didn't show on the evening news. Let me tell you what happened after the cameras left. Let me tell you how I turned the ashes of what they built on my silence into something that would outlive all of us. The land near Willow Creek sat untouched for nearly 50 years. Trees thick with bark, wildflowers tangled through rusted fence posts, and the river so still it looked like glass. I hadn't been there since Lawrence and I first bought it, back when we dreamed of building a retreat for elders who had nowhere else to go. We called it the listening place. We never got to build it. Life took him from me, and then Walter and Dina tried to take the rest. But when I stood there again, deed in hand and the sun pouring through the leaves, I knew what I had to do. It was time to keep my promise. Not just to Lawrence, but to every woman who's ever been locked away. Starved, erased, told she's too old to matter. It started with a sketch on a napkin. Then a meeting with a young architect named Melina Hart, barely 30, passionate, and full of ideas that made my old bones feel young again. When I told her my vision, she didn't blink. She asked, "How big can we go?" I said, "Big enough to hold stories that were never allowed to be told." She smiled. And we got to work. Within weeks, the first blueprints were drafted. Community center. An open-air reading space. A garden where every plant was named after a woman who had survived something. And at the heart of it all, a small house. Modest, peaceful. For me. For the life they thought I'd never rebuild. The settlement from the lawsuit came in quietly. The state forced Walter and Dina to return everything they'd taken, and then some. Their real estate licenses were suspended. Their accounts were audited. And when they tried to shift blame onto each other, the house of cards collapsed. They divorced. But their ruin wasn't what satisfied me. It was what I built with their betrayal. The listening place opened its doors last month. We had 73 visitors on day 1. Most of them women over 60. A few brought granddaughters. Some came in wheelchairs. Others walked with fire in their stride. One of them was Clarabelle Tate. She wore a bright purple shawl and handed me a leather-bound notebook. "I never wrote it down before," she said. "But I think I'm ready." She wasn't the only one. By the end of the week, we had stories from widows, single mothers, forgotten sisters, abandoned daughters, silenced wives. Some wrote pages. Others wrote one sentence. Each was sacred. Each mattered. Franklin visited a few weeks later. He didn't bring flowers. He brought tools. Said he wanted to help build a gazebo out near the river bend. We didn't talk much at first. Just hammered nails and cut boards while the sun dipped over the creek. I read your book, he said eventually. Kept sanding. I cried the whole way through, he continued. I don't expect forgiveness. I just want to know if I can sit next to you again. I looked at the bench we had just finished. It was strong. Steady. I nodded toward it. Start there. We sat in silence for a long time. And that was enough. Dina never came. Not to court. Not to the center. Not even to the funeral when her own mother passed a month ago. I hear she moved to another state, changed her name. Let her. Some people run from their shame. Me. Planted mine. And it bloomed into wild marigolds. I live in the little house now. Every morning I walk the gardens. I pour coffee from a blue kettle and read 3 pages of someone else's pain. Then I write 2 of my own joy. Sometimes I speak to Lawrence. Loud. He never answers. But I think he'd be proud. Because what they tried to kill in me, that spark, that truth, that self, it didn't just survive. It lit a fire that will outlive us all. So if you're watching this, and you've ever felt invisible, if you've ever been left in the dark, forgotten in a room that used to be yours, if someone tried to write the end of your story for you, hear me now. You are not done. You are not broken. You're just waiting to bloom. This is the story they didn't want you to hear. This is the silence I turned into a roar. And this, my darlings, is only the beginning. If this story moved you, if it reminded you of your strength, please like, comment, and subscribe to our channel. Share your own story below. We read everyone. Let's make sure no woman's truth ever stays buried again.